this time I remember the hit go live early. I even had to mute Gov because he was shooting off so many great takes about week number 2 that I had to say save it for the show. And so we had to start this thing right, Gov. Week 2
Oh, you're good. You're good.
It was interesting, and I didn't do well from a results oriented standpoint, and I felt like I got lucky last week and unlucky this week. So I think this will be a good show. We also brought back Donnie, who doesn't play DFS, which I think will be great because you'll be able to give us a result oriented approach, Donnie, from a non-DraftKings perspective. But I think you'll be surprised in the relationship that they share. They might be different sexes being the way we consume football, but it's still football. It's still the same universe. And surprisingly enough, like you'd be surprised how much the marketplace still respects one another.
Right.
I mean, even Roger Goodell, who doesn't probably play fantasy football, he respects fantasy football because he knows that's why we watched the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Atlanta Falcons at 9:30 in the morning 4 years ago in London. So even people that don't play understand the value and the participation it takes to break it down. And I think that's where gambling has kind of gone, from a perspective is more respect. And finally, we're starting to get respect as like football analysts and smart people and guys like Eric Eager and guys like that. Like betting isn't just for degenerates. It really isn't.
Agreed.
Speaking of that, though, what would be the best advice you could give me or Gov, Donnie, as a player who didn't play, that like made the right process or did some of the right things, but might not have won? Like, from a non-playing perspective, what would you say to us? Like, I didn't win this week. I don't know how much success Gov had. We'll get to that in just a moment. What would you tell the people from a person who didn't gamble? What would you tell the gambler with some hindsight, 2020?
Well, I mean, if a process is generally a good process and it's profitable and it's maybe not even profitable, but it's good in some way for you, it probably makes sense to stick with it as long as you're within your, betting limits and not going over yourself. I think if it helps you enjoy the sport in general, that's a way to do it. And
right.
Your process is your process.
It's that old adage, if you enjoy your work, you'll never work a day in your life. And me and Gov get so much enjoyment. And I'll be honest with you guys, I get a lot of enjoyment just speaking to Gov, getting to know him personally. Me and Donnie have the same connections with, some of our video game ventures and the way we play 2K together and stuff of this nature. It's not about necessarily always the hobby. It's about the connections you make outside of it that are important. So even in losing weeks and weeks where you break even, like you got to appreciate it all. And that's where you got to have a process and a balance. So what would be the number 2 takeaway? Like week 1 is always exciting, and week 2 I think is where we start to nail down a process. So like, what advice would you give to people, just as an overview?
I would say that we are still only at week 2. So we are getting more information, but it's still not a large enough sample size to really like take anything to heart. Like this is actually the point in time where, okay, most teams might have had a home and a road game or a division game and a non-division game. So like now it's time where they'll evaluate and start making their minor adjustments through the middle of the season. The good teams that are already 2-0, they might not make many adjustments. Like it depends. If Buffalo beats Tennessee tonight, they'll probably just do what they've been doing the first 2 weeks. Whereas a team like the Giants or the Panthers probably need to reevaluate their plans.
Yeah. And you look at a team like the Texans have a better record than the Raiders do. Does that mean that Raiders have less talent? So we have to be careful with the definitive statements we make in just 2 weeks because it matters opponent, location, as you were mentioning, and just like personal things matter to players too, like travel, is this kid a hometown kid? Did he have to get more tickets for his family? Like, did he get food poisoning at the restaurant? Like, all these little things matter. And talking about building a process and reviewing a process, I wanted to mention how I didn't do well this week, but I thought like I made a lot of the same smart decisions. No better example than just pulling up like a guy like Daniel Bellinger, right? I got 0 points from him in week 1, but he was only 2,500, and he helped me fit in so much around him, more the expensive chalk guys who ended up hitting in week 1, that I could take 2 zeros. I got a 0 from him and a 0 from the Detroit Lions, and still had a very profitable day. I turned $4 into $31 in week 1. And then in week 2, I got no zeros. Everyone produced, but I still lost because in week 2 we saw 3 players combine for 150 points. If you had stacked Tua, if you had stacked Tua, Hill, and
Waddle.
you would.
That was 135 right there. If you had either Andrews or Bateman on the other side, you added another 25 to 30.
Right.
So, yeah, you're talking about a 4-man double stack bring back, got you 160 points. And then you, like, I think the top lineups only got to like 170 or 270. So, like you're saying, a 4-man stack got you 160, and then the other 5 people in your lineup got you about 100.
Yep.
It's like, so that's not bad. That's amazing, actually.
Yeah, and I just want to mention also as well, like in my life, week 1, Devontae Adams smashes. Great play, right? People want to vacuum and say, oh, great play. He was still a great play in week 2. He just didn't make the catches. But he still had the opportunity. Like, the love that him and Derek Carr have was still shared. You know what I mean? It was still there. It was still evident.
Agreed.
I mean, but he only got 9 points, and he actually got lucky this week to get 9 points because one of them, one of those 2 catches ended up being a touchdown, which is 7. So, like, he could have easily got 2 points. But that doesn't mean he was a bad play. This doesn't mean he was a good player in week 1. It's just sometimes we have to understand volume is the process. And if you can distinguish volume and ownership, that's what you want. A guy who was exactly basically the same in terms of production was Michael Thomas, with almost exactly the same price, for example, with slightly more ownership, but he got like 22 in week 1 and 18 in week 2. He was still a good process. Like, that's one where you get the same results, But then you're going to get unlucky at times too, Guys like Amon St. Brown is a good receiver, but he had an outlier great performance. Don't expect 40 points from him again, just like don't expect 40 points from Jamar Jefferson. What were some of your bigger takeaways from a conceptual standpoint, Go?
Well, my normal strategy that I like to do in a lot of my lineups is to pay down at running back, and that actually worked out pretty well this week because a lot of the high-priced running backs did not do well. Barkley did not have an amazing game. Snowflake. Swift didn't break the slate. I think the only running back that actually had a really good day was Nick Chubb, who had 30 points. Otherwise, the next highest scoring running back was like 18 or 19. And there were guys between 9K, Christian McCaffrey and JT, and all the way down to your $40 or $5,100 Pollard, and guys like that all basically had the same point. Michael Carter at 5,200 had 10 points, or 6,200 you get 12. Like, a lot of the running backs were basically very flat and the same, which unless a guy has like a Nick Chubb 3-touchdown outlier performance tends to happen. So you pay down at running back, and that allows you to pay up for your Hill and your Brown and your Waddle and your premium stack and a premium tight end.
Right.
Like that works good. And that worked good yesterday. Like my best lineup was a Tua stack, and I turned $3 into $75. So it was a solid day.
Right.
Just on that.
I want to bring Donnie back in because you brought up a good point with Nick Chubb scoring so many points, and people in fantasy loved it, but real life people said he was an idiot for scoring because if he just took in a knee, they would have won the game because then they could have ran out the clock. But he scored, which gave them the chance to then score and then get the onside kick. So Donnie, what from a real life standpoint like changes when you watch it from a fantasy standpoint? Because like fantasy owners might watch Nick Chubb because he's in their lineup, where as a Brown fan or like a football fan, you're like, that's just a bad decision to score a touchdown.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's really what it comes down to. It's a bad decision. But I will say at that point, not many players are probably thinking clock management. A lot of players are just going to go and score that touchdown and say this game's going to be over anyway. Mm-hmm. So I don't really think that you can really fault the decision because hindsight's always 20/20. If it was a 1-point game and he scored that touchdown, it's an awful decision and he should have just gone down. But I don't see an issue with him wanting to score and trying to just get his stats up. He's trying to make money too.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. There's probably somebody in the top 10 here, if I went to the list, where they made money, life-changing money off of that Nick Chubb touchdown. So, one bad decision for him changes the decision or the life or the decision of other people. So, that's how we have to look at things from a grander perspective. It's not, was it right, was it wrong? It was, yeah, it probably wasn't the best decision. It wasn't the best process, but it happened for the right reason. I mean, the way I look at it, Gov, is everyone wants to micromanage that one play, right? He shouldn't have scored. He should have had better awareness. I agree. But had he not performed up to that point, they wouldn't have been in that situation. He literally put that team on his back, and we wanted to praise Saquon Barkley in week 1, revising the process, revising the prize as we do on this show. But then we're mad at him for scoring, which I get was awareness issue maybe. But had he not performed up to that point, they wouldn't even have been there. So yeah, it was a bad decision, but let's not roast the guy like he's like the worst football player of all time because he made one bad decision. Todd Gurley made a similar decision a couple of years ago with the Lions with the same result.
I want to just add there with the Nick Chubb decision, the points that were possible if you had Flacco, Wilson, and Chubb in that situation, that really could have made you so much more points. And, that's what you're looking for as a fantasy. I don't think anyone has that, but there could have been somebody in there with that. So,
well, I mean, let's be honest. We saw on Sunday Night Football where there was a missed snap because Watson motioned and got in the way of the snap of Aaron Rodgers, and the center didn't see it, and the snap ran off his helmet or his back, and it was a fumble snap. So even if Chubb takes a knee there, they still have to then take the snap and kneel the ball up. So who's to say it wouldn't have been a fumble or something like that. So hindsight's always 20/20 on these things. It's like criticizing a coach for going for it on 4th down. If it works, he's smart. He's courageous. If the 4-man double stack of the Chiefs of the Dolphins and Ravens game, if you pick 4 guys from that game and St. Brown, you won $1,000 this week. That's not to say you should do that every week, Gov. And I think that to bring it back full circle, that's kind of the point. It's not every week is the same. Not every result is exactly going to lead you to $1,000 every week.
Agreed.
I don't know if you can see it, but in this contest, for example, I brought it up, and I can even make it a little bit bigger here in a second, but I brought it up, and the guy played the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. I understand why. Pittman's ruled out. You knew that Jacksonville had a pretty good defensive line. They invested in Walker. Like even a guy like Donnie who doesn't play DFS can, that's where like the fandom thing crosses over so well. It's like, yeah, they invested so much in their defensive line. They invested in both of their offensive lines. So then Trevor Lawrence had success, puts more pressure on the Colts to score. They got an aging quarterback without his number one wide receiver. The Jaguars defense play made sense. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm sure he didn't think, if I play Jacksonville today, I'm going to get 21 fantasy points. He just thought all those other things I just mentioned, It was like they're in a good position. And that's all we can do is put ourselves in the right position.
Yes, exactly. I had the same process from like the Sunday night game that I was telling you earlier.
Right.
So like I played a lot. I was heavy on AJ Dillon last night in the Sunday night game.
Right.
He got a large amount of the touches. He got more touches than Aaron Jones. Did it work out? No, he had a horrible game. He did not get a lot of yards. He didn't get any of his touchdowns. That he didn't convert any of his red zone carries. And Aaron Jones smashed. I do not hate my process. I don't think I was in the wrong. It just did not work out that night.
Yeah, let me give you another example of something that would have totally flipped the script, and maybe we're not wrong. I played Jared Goff and Swift, right? Amon St. Brown goes off and scores 42 fantasy points, has over 100 yards, breaks a record because this is I think like the 9th time he's had over like 6 catches and 100 yards in consecutive games. Congratulations to the young man. I was floored when we drafted him. I thought he was one of the best receivers, and so from a real life standpoint, you can ask anyone. I was thrilled to have him. But Jared Goff missed DJ Shark twice on deep plays, including a flea flicker that was totally wide open. He missed DeAndre Swift by just an eyelash. Like Swift got his hand on the ball. Maybe should have even been pass interference. I had Swift. I think Gov might have had Swift too. I know you had the Lions, or you had Williams, excuse me. And that's
Yes.
like one of the things is I get the Swift touchdown, I look smarter. More than likely, St. Brown probably only gets like 20 points. Your Williams play looks worse, potentially. That game might have switched. And then you look at something like Antonio Gibson. This guy doesn't win this contest without the Antonio Gibson touchdown because the rest of his stats don't necessarily look good. But he got the 1-yard rushing touchdown, which helps,
Yep.
So that's the same thing with Adams I mentioned before. He's still snowflaked. He got 9 points, but only 2 catches. It was basically like a tight end performance of a goal line situation. But so points aren't always equal, and I think people pay attention to these flame emojis too much. And it's like, how did it happen? Pay attention to this column over here. Donnie, what was the one thing you saw this week that from a fantasy perspective, from a non-fantasy, you don't know how scoring works on DraftKings. So I'm curious to see who do you think had the best performances, like just as a football fan. I want to see how they translate.
Obviously, 2 of 6 touchdowns pops out a lot, even with the interceptions. I can see the points right there, but I'm sure that would have been in my head anyway. The Dolphins receivers I knew went off because I have Tyreek on my fantasy team, but I know you guys talked about the running backs not performing that well this week.
Outside of Nick Chubb.
Outside of Nick Chubb,
yeah.
I would say I'm sure that there's there's probably a bunch of those running backs kind of just bunched together at around 10, right?
Yeah, like 7 to 15 is basically.
Yeah,
I think,
I know,
like I said, I think the next highest behind Chubb was McCaffrey, who was at 19.
I pulled up
that was higher, and then Swift, who got to 16, I think. But those were like the next 2. Damian Harris got to 16, or yeah. Like a lot of 10 to 16s. Yeah.
I pulled up a Nick Chubb team so we could compare.
So, is there, based on Nick Chubb, how much does he do you think he would affect most of these teams in the standings? The top person with Nick Chubb's 21.
He was 8% owned, and he got 32 points.
Yeah.
So that seems like a pretty good thing to have if you have it.
Yes.
Right.
The only thing that was really hurting him was he was still a higher priced running back. So, like, yes, everyone else who was playing Mixon or Javonte Williams or James Conner, who were all in about the same price range, if you had builds like that and you had Chubb instead, you did massively better. But those builds also, like, again, like this one, what was the defense? This one might literally just be the what's the defense in this one?
The Jets.
So it got 2 points. So if you were to switch out the Jets for the Jaguars, this team right here gets 20 more points and immediately goes from 21st to where would 257 put this right now?
Probably first. That's why I brought it up.
No, second. So like it literally you're getting that massively the volatile defense, because defense is super volatile in its scoring. They can score anywhere between 2 and 20 on any week, and it can be almost any defense. But that's the only thing keeping this Chubb lineup from basically being first or second place is not having one of the major defenses. It has everything else you need. It has Chubb plus a solid payer down run back. It has that Tua, that it has the Miami game. You went Lamar instead of Tua. You still got 2 45-point receivers and 30-point Andrews. And then you paid down at your receivers. Dortch was fine. Zay Jones did not do well. And that's where you're at. But basically, you're 21 points out of first, and there was a 21-point defense you probably could have played. So, like, this lineup is a perfect thing of it did everything right. It just missed out on the defense that there just happened to be 2 this week in the Bucs and the Jaguars that were 20-plus points.
I will say
those were the lineups that were going to actually win tournaments, were any one of the builds that had one of those 2 defenses. Right. But to get in the top 20 and to have like basically a 0 from your defense is really good. To have 2 snowflakes and get in the top 20, that's hard to do. You had to hit everything else pretty much right.
Well, it's similar to what I did in week 1 too. That's what I'm talking about. I had no snowflakes this week but lost. Had 2 last week and 1. Sometimes it's process. I will say, we have been talking about process and like just knowing the process. This guy made one stupid mistake because he played Nick Chubb with.
No, he played Nick Chubb against the Gents defense. So yeah, that is a massive. I would never play my running back against the defense.
I will say this about the process as well. I know we hit on this game earlier this week or last week, right before the games. We were talking about the Jets defense and how it was going against Brissett. It had a chance to really shut down that Browns offense. It didn't, but on paper, it looked like it was going to be a good thing for them.
I actually still think it was a good play had he not played Chubb. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to be disoriented and say, oh, I got 2 points. Because think about this reverse, right? The Lions went up on the Washington Commanders 22-0 in the first half. They scored 21 points in the first half, finished with 9. So that's, to Gus' point, that speaks to the variance of defenses. But the process was still the same. They were facing an older quarterback who was having trouble with mobility, similar to the Jags. They're facing Matt Ryan. He looks decrepit like Philip Rivers did a few years ago for them in terms of mobility. And then you take away their best weapon. You know, for some reason, Washington is very similar, hasn't got their best weapon involved in Terry McLaurin. The play made sense. And I think, to Donnie's point, this play made sense too. It's just Chubb had one of the days. But to play both of them together was the error.
Agreed.
I do like that he played Harris over Stevenson because all the narrative was that Stevenson was going to take over.
Yep. And he got Harris at horribly like he has so many low-owned plays. The only reason I would think to do what he did with the Jets, there's only one scenario I could think, and that would be you thought that with Chubb's low ownership, doing something like that with the Jets would make you so different that you could probably play a chalkier lineup with that Chubb Jets combo, knowing that you're going to get a less than 1% lineup that has Chubb and the Jets. But then he doesn't do that. He still has 1% Harris, 7% Waddle, 3% Jones. Like he has some chalk with Dortch, and like Hill was kind of on the radar, but like not massively. But like that Chubb Jets combo is something I would have expected in like a Derek Carr stack with Adams, and then you're still playing Barkley, like something like that. That was much chalkier.
How much would, like, if they got 1 or 2 more interceptions, would that have affected the Jets' score? Because maybe he was expecting.
Hell, if it were just stayed low scoring, if you still have 1 sack, 1 pick, and it's 17-13 instead of 34-28. Jets are probably like a 6-7 point defense instead of 2 points.
Right.
And
but I'm trying not to
like the Jets were like one of the cheapest defenses of the slate. Like anything around 2,000, you only really need 7 points for them to be so we're talking like the difference between a snowflake and a fire emoji for a defense is like 5 points sometimes based on that.
Yeah, the Jets defense was not a bad play. I would have never paired it with Chubb, but like basically playing the Jets defense is sort of the same play as playing Jacksonville. They were about the same price. It just so happened Jacksonville had that amazing game and put up 20. And it just so happened another defense in the 3K range did the same thing in the Bucks. So there were multiple defenses at multiple different price ranges that got you 20. So there's different lineup builds. Here's one right here. Bucks got you 26. So if you had one where you paid an extra 1,000 at defense, now you have to pay down in a few other places. You didn't get Hill, but you got St. Brown to go with Waddle. You still paid mid-range or lower for your running backs with Gibson and Carter. And just like if you got 20 points out of your running backs, you were good. So like even Chubb and like that one lineup with the, like, that's why I'm like, that one lineup that had the Jets lineup, he's literally that defense away from shipping that tournament because he got everything he needed to out of his running backs and more than what I've seen with the top lineups. And he still had a Tua stack with all the 45-point guys. So, like, that was an amazing lineup. It's just, he got unlucky. Like, the Jets, Jacoby Brissett could have had a fumble or something, or another interception. He could have maybe gotten to like 7 to 10 points, and then the Jets defense looks pretty good too as a cheap one. But really, like the Jets defense getting you 2 points doesn't hurt you unless another defense in that range does much, much better.
Right.
So like,
well, let's look at this.
Like process wise, playing the Jets is good. It didn't work out because the Jags were so good.
Yeah,
that's it.
Well, that's one point out. He played Carter and the Jets, so that made sense. Like this, but here's where the old curmudgeons get pissed off. And Donnie's favorite team is the Patriots, so I think he'll appreciate my take here with Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick does not care about fantasy football. I don't care that Bill Belichick doesn't care about fantasy football. It's really indifferent to me, right? But I understand why he doesn't care about fantasy football because he is a numbers-based, analytical, like decision-making process kind of calculator. And when you see things like Carson Wentz have a fire emoji after his performance in real life, you're like, okay, fantasy is stupid. And we can agree that fantasy points for quarterbacks does get pretty stupid. It isn't really indicative if they've had actually good days or not. But me and Gov could admit that as fantasy players, but also respect the rules. Like, it's almost like if you go to a restaurant, it's like, I don't like maybe that I'm sitting next to a baby, but I'm not going to tell that baby to shut up, like, or blame the parents because the baby cried. Like, when you're in an environment, you just have to know the rules and the parameters and the settings of that environment. And so, like, I'm not saying that Carson Wentz is a better quarterback than Derek Carr, but in week 2, he was. In week 2, he was a better player. You know, and I think that's where sometimes we have to do things for a lot of different reasons. For whatever reason you build your lineup, just know that's the reason. You know, it's like this example. He left salary cap on the table. all that makes sense some weeks. Some weeks it doesn't. Like, but it's all about being comfortable with what you're doing. Like, as long as you're doing it for your reasons, then I'm fine with it.
Exactly.
Like, for example, Donnie, this guy, his cousin might be George Pickens. Maybe that's why he played George Pickens.
Right.
Maybe he's a Steelers fan. Or maybe he was like, hey, he's a rookie. He's a talented rookie. And eventually he's going to blow up like Odell Beckham. And I believe in his talent because I saw him, and I know how talented the guy is. I'm just going to play him every damn week at less than 1% owned. And eventually he's going to hit. He only scored, like 5 less than Devontae Adams, who cost almost $9K this week. So, I mean, even that's not a terrible decision as long as you can justify it with logic.
Yes, agreed. I agree with that 100%.
So hit me with a take here, Gov, in terms of week 2 that we could kind of look at from a grander's perspective that we can carry into week 3.
Let's see, a big take from the weekend. There seems to be a good amount of scoring. I'll say that. Like, red zone's up in touchdowns from watching it. So I wonder if that will continue or if maybe it'll be like the last couple years because of no preseason. Defenses take a few weeks to actually get to gelling, and it's only really like the 1 or 2 really good defenses that are playing well right now. But I'm not sure. Maybe offense will just reign supreme the rest of the year. What do you think? Because Detroit is coming out it's just seems like every team has a lot of offensive weapons when it's I'm not sure if that's how it really is.
It's funny you bring up Detroit, and I don't mean to be a homer because you brought up not me.
Right.
But you got to remember, we're missing our number 1 draft pick in the first round on offense. People know Hutchinson because he got 3 sacks and basically led that good defense to be underrated this week and still put up, I think, 9 points. We're missing the top offensive weapon that we drafted, and Williams, and he's projected to be like a taller version of Tyreek Hill in that offense. And we get him back, who knows? Maybe it gets better, or maybe there's no chemistry at all and it's actually worse. So we can't just look at things on paper and be like, oh, this is a good play, this is a bad play. Look at Wilson in this line, Jeff Wilson. If he gets a touchdown like Gibson did, then he smashes and he's got a red, So it's just understanding things. And Donnie, you're an NFL savant. They changed the rules, right, on offense. Or they made the referees basically call more penalties in favor of the offense, correct?
I would think a little bit. It has seemed like the penalties have been a little bit more in favor of that. I will say I've noticed a good chunk of delay games so far this year. They're not giving us much time at the line of scrimmage before the play.
That's what I had heard, that they were told to put more emphasis on the man press. So when a receiver is pressed more than 5 yards on the field, they're supposed to call that with more regularity and really pay attention to that. And they were also told to call holding more and less PIs, and then to be aware of the clock, because they felt like a lot of quarterbacks would do these bulk motions like you see in baseball, give me the ball, and they do these motion plays, and so that was a way to kind of counterbalance that. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's just lucky variance, but we are seeing more scoring. Do you think that leads to more correlation, Jeff?
It very well could.
Or do you think that's a mistake? Because I actually kind of think it might be a mistake. My big takeaway this week would be that everyone's going to look at that Ravens-Dolphins game and be like, well, that game scored, 140 points with 3 players. I got to find the 3 players that are going to correlate and score 140 points. I just think that was an outlier. Correlation, good, smart decision. Going to the buffet and eating till you puke, bad decision. Like there's a balancing act we got to balance here.
Agreed. And I that's what I said. I kind of want to see how this plays out throughout the season.
Right.
So I'm not sure how it is going. It's still early. It's only week 2. That would be my other big takeaway is just remember, it's only week 2.
Right.
Sticking on the Ravens for a second. So next week, the Ravens play the Patriots. The Patriots defense always gets killed by rushing quarterbacks. Would Lamar Jackson be a play that you'd want to look at, even though he's going to be expensive? Or is that out of question because of the low scoring that the Patriots have allowed?
It's possible. Like, it depends. At this point, that sounds like something ownership will help me to determine. If it seems like a lot of people are on Lamar to have another big game against New England, then that might be something I'm willing to fade at his high price. But if it's just like this week where no one was really playing the Miami-Baltimore game, then I will probably still have shots at Lamar. Like, he is totally capable, and he's shown, and this is a team that's the only problem is this is a team that's not done great the first 2 weeks. So I don't know if they're going to just keep going the course, and eventually they're going to bring on Dobbins and going to want to run the ball more.
Yeah, I would flip this on you, Donnie. I would ask you because you don't play, so but you do play fantasy football. So if you did pay, because Lamar Jackson will be the highest priced quarterback on the slate, so you're going to have to allocate quite a bit of salary to a position like Carson Wentz. I pulled it before, could easily get you a lot of garbage time points for a garbage time price. But you're paying for that consistency and that ceiling of Lamar Jackson. What kind of game would he have to have, in your opinion, to justify that price?
Well, I don't think that the Patriots are going to be able to stop him. I think he's going to completely kill that defense. And he might have another rushing performance where he hits almost 100 yards. And that doesn't include his passing, which maybe they slow that down. But if he's hitting 100 yards as a quarterback, he's going to at least get close to valued, I think.
See, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'm not saying you're right or wrong. You could be totally right. Everything you just said on a Monday could be totally right or it could be totally wrong. But it's not stupid, Donnie. And I'm glad you brought that up because I'll bring this point up. Say we're building the lineup, right? We don't know the prices. But so Donnie's saying Lamar Jackson's still worth it, so he's going to pay for Lamar Jackson. What you're saying, though, is this is a good week to fade Mark Andrews because he was only 9% this week. We get Travis Kelce back in the main slate. So if you want to pay for a Travis Kelce or a more consistent tight end, Travis Kelce might be slept on more. People will forget that, okay, actually coming into the season, he was the number one tight end. Mark Andrews comes off the good performance. We always see a spike in ownership. You're saying they might shut down his number one option. It'd be better to play Lamar Jackson still, eat that chalk, and then pair him with another receiver. And maybe even pair him without Bateman because Bateman scored like a 72-yard touchdown. So maybe it's Duvernay this week. Or maybe J.K. Dobbins. Maybe you do something really weird and you just play all the running options. You say the Ravens are going to score 5 rushing touchdowns and no one's going to play Dobbins because he hasn't even played this year. And I'm going to get all the rushing touchdowns.
Well, I wouldn't say Dobbins, but yeah, I would say Lamar and another receiver on that team might be something to consider heading into the next week.
Right.
I'm still not so sure. I wouldn't because for Lamar to really have a ceiling, yeah, he'll have the 100 yards and a rushing touchdown, but he's also probably going to have this week 200 to 300 passing yards and 2 to 3 passing touchdowns to go along with it. And if that's the case, then he's going to bring at least 1, if not 2 pass catchers along with him. So if I'm playing Lamar in a tournament, I'm going to have either Andrews or Bateman or Duvernay with him, if not 2 of those guys.
I would avoid Andrews because the Patriots will want to take away their number one target.
That I would agree with that 100%. I'm thinking more you'll get a little different by going Bateman and Duvernay. in a lineup. Or
Right.
even better, their cheaper tight end, their rookie that they use, Isaiah Likely. You could that'll give you a good leverage there too. You could do Likely and Bateman with a Lamar stack. That would be solid.
Yeah, and he's gotten more involved. He actually outscored Devontae Adams, I think, by less than a point. I think he got almost 9 to 10 points. And from a tight end perspective, it's similar to defense. It has a lot of variance. Gov, what was the one thing that you were proud that you made, even if it was a mistake this week? What was the one decision where you're like, I was different here, or I did this for a good reason? It could have worked out, it could not have worked out. Like, kind of tell the people like what the thing is that you're really proud of that you made it in week 2 that no one else really saw coming. That you're like, yep, my process wasn't good, it was great. It was Tony the Tiger great, Don. It was.
I mean, I was very heavy on Tyreek Hill, and he was in most of my lineups in the main slate. I also was overweight on the Bucks defense. I knew that game specifically was going to be a slogfest, slow-paced defensive affair, and it ended up being even more than that, and the Bucks defense just smashed. So, like, between Bucks D and Tyreek Hill, I had a very good main slate. But then I also had the exact opposite that we talked about earlier. Sunday night comes, and I'm heavy A.J. Dillon, and that probably kept me from having a really smashing night Sunday night.
Right.
I was still able to cash because my process and my lineups were still good. I probably had some of the best A.J. Dillon lineups you could build, but A.J. Dillon did not do enough to pull me across on Sunday and night.
Yeah, well,
so like I had good and bad on Sunday, but like I was definitely heavy on Tyreek Hill all week. And the Bucks defense was one of my top defenses, and those both smashed. Those were my big smash plays of the week.
And to be transparent, this is my lineup in week 2. I showed you my lineup in week 1. And again, I'll go back to it. If I play Amon St. Brown over Swift, then this lineup cashes. You know?
Yep.
But it's not to say it's a bad play. Like I mentioned, Swift just missed a touchdown by inches, you know? I want to hit on some of the headline news, and this is why it's good to have Donnie here, is because he can shed some light too. It's like, so everyone was saying in the preseason that Trey Lance was very talented. Like he had revolutionary talent, but he was immature, right? And then he has a bad week 1. And then do you guys know what he did after week 1? He went to the strip club. Okay? And some people view that as, oh, this shows you that he hasn't matured. This shows you that he's still the child, right? And then, unfortunately, he got hurt in week number 2, and he basically broke his leg or shattered his leg in some fashion, and he will not be playing for the remainder of the season, right? So Jimmy comes in. I don't think it is fair to have the correlation to say, oh, Trey Lance made the mistake of being immature or was immature, and therefore he went to the strip club proving he is more immature. And if he had worked out better or worked out differently, he wouldn't have gotten hurt. But people make that correlation the same way people will say, like, well, Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews worked out this week, so I got to go back to it next week. And it's just like, you can say both things. Like, you could say Trey Lance is immature. And you could also say it was unfortunate he got hurt. Some things don't have to marry together, right? And I think we do that too much.
I mean, every player is going to have their free time, and I'm not going to judge how they spend their free time as long as they're, even if they aren't producing, if they're showing up to games, if they're going to practices, if they're just putting in the effort that they should be putting in. Who am I to judge if he wants to go to a strip club at, what is he, 21, 22?
Right, exactly, to my point. I know you guys are basketball fans. Me and Gov played basketball and DFS. James Harden is notoriously known for going to strip clubs, supporting a lot of women in that regard as an art form. And you could argue whether it's an art form or not. Some people would say it's an art form, you know. But here's the thing: he's a scoring leader. He produces, and so no one like talks about it in the same way. But like one guy has an unfortunate injury, and we want to bury him and say it's immaturity. It's just like that's the same with building a lineup. Is we can't be so result oriented. It's more of a process type thing, you know. I don't think Trey Lance going to the strip club had anything to do with the leg injury. Now, maybe, you know, had he been more mature with his training, then he would have maybe not gotten hurt. You could say that, but then with age comes money. Like he can't go on the Tom Brady diet plan, boys and girls. He doesn't got Tom Brady money. He doesn't got, you know. So like, let's be fair to the guy. You know, he's coming out of Division II football. You know, every path is a bit different, and that's what we should remember with the lineups too. Every path, make sure the path makes sense, but then don't act like, oh well, I stumbled and fell, so that way we need to burn the forest down. I just think that's a bad process. I just want to kind of relate that to a real life story, Gov, to how we would think about lineups and processes as well. Any other big headlines that you saw that translate to fantasy? Because that one really bothered me, that the media would even portray maturity with an injury that way. That one bothered me. It really did.
I never even heard that story until right now, honestly. 100% honestly. I'd never even heard anyone say anything about Trey Lance's stuff or anything like immaturity. Like I didn't know about this is all news to me.
Well, that's good because you don't pay attention to the mainstream. Like that's what the mainstream was talking about this morning. If Trey Lance was more mature, if he was willing to, it's like he doesn't have the Tom Brady diet because he's not Tom Brady. You know, like.
Also, let's not act like Brady was doing that at that age anyway.
Yeah, right. Brady didn't start doing that until later in his career. So
at least till when he was after his ACL tear. So
right. I just don't like how we make these grand statements based on simple, like short results. Like we're only in week 2, like Gov said. You know, there are plenty of times for things to happen. Ezekiel Elliott would have basically outscored Gibson had he got a touchdown. Does that mean that Gibson or Elliott's more talented? You know, does that mean like, oh, well, Gibson's younger, so he was a smarter player? Like, sometimes our justification for why we play things doesn't got to make sense, but then we don't got to make sense to be like, oh, this is just for fun, you know? Like I mentioned it earlier, Greg Dortch, he was a good process play because he was so cheap. Or maybe you play him because, you know, you went to high school with him, like, but you still play him. Like, so it's not always, things don't always have to make sense, but then we don't always have to justify it with logic when it's not logical. We all have biases. It's okay.
Yep.
Donnie, what's the healthiest approach you would take if you were going to play fantasy football or start to build a lineup? Given that you've heard us talk about this now for a while, you've heard me talk about it. Like, what's the number one thing you would kind of approach building a lineup for week 3?
Well, the first thing I'd look at is definitely where do I think I can get the most value at the quarterback position, whether it's a cheaper guy like Goff or, you know, go to the top of the thing like a Lamar Jackson. Then see where the stacks would work out in that situation. Even if, you know, Kittle plays this week and you go Garoppolo Kittle, but I don't know what Garoppolo's pricing would be, but I'm assuming it would be on the lower end. So, right. You know, trying to find players that would work there. And the hardest thing always for me when thinking about fantasy is defense, because you never know which team's going to get that one lucky tipped interception or, you know, anything like that, or a pass interference that leads to a touchdown later.
Right. Or let's say the defense played really well but didn't get any sacks. Like, that's where real life in fantasy is similar to the quarterback. comparison I made just doesn't always correlate. And it's like you can argue that this is right or wrong or it should be reflected different in fantasy, but sometimes it's just the way it is. Like me and Gov, when we log into DraftKings, there's terms and services. There's rules that we have to follow. There's a salary cap. There are things that we have to do within this game to play this game. We can't put in valid lineups out there just because we want to play all the studs. Like, that's not how it works. So, any other review notes that you want to mention, Jeff?
No, I think we covered most everything this week. That Miami-Baltimore game was a smash. That basically killed. Like, you needed multiple pieces of that to be at the top of the tournament. And then there were multiple 20-point defenses. It's not going to happen every week. So
yeah, I guess another thing I would say is don't chase points. Chase good plays based on how you think they'll behave in the offense.
Yeah. Look at volume, look at touches. Yeah. Don't chase touchdowns. Chase volume. Like, I don't care if the guy scored 2 touchdowns. Did he get 20 touches?
Right. Is like, for example, like if I was to pose this question to you, Donnie, do you believe Devontae Adams is still the #1 target for the Oakland Raiders?
Of course.
Okay, so if he's under a certain price, then you should play him. If Hopkins comes back, do we play Greg Dortch? That depends on price. So there are decisions to be made based on the volume that you expect. We know when Hopkins comes back, the volume for a younger player who wasn't projected for maybe coming into the season is going to drop. So at what point, at what price, at what ownership do you think that's going to happen? That's really what matters. So with that being said, I think we're pretty much good to go for the week. Donnie, did you want to give the people, we'll break it down more into our picks and spreadsheets and why we did it and like more the process, and you guys can like and subscribe as always. And then we come back a Friday night where we'll do a full breakdown and then we'll preview week 3 with some more of our favorite bets or our favorite spread games of the week. But just give the people a brief overview of how we did this week.
All right, so starting off with Logan, you had Raiders and Saints. Those both did not work out, giving you 0-2.
Correct.
Gob went Falcons Dolphins. Dolphins comeback really put him right there at the 1-1 mark. I had the Eagles Monday, so we don't know that one yet. And the Jets with the onside kick really saved me there, and I'm sitting at 1-0.
If we go by the spread, I'm 2-0 because I got +10 from Atlanta, and they almost came back too.
Yeah,
I was looking at the spreads when I took those, so I was taking points too. But yeah, Miami coming back got that. So like, but that's no pick them like 1-1. It's a good way to start the season. I'm not horrible. Atlanta almost came back and gave me a 2-0. So like, I'll give it that.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's another point I want to mention really quickly. Kyle Pitts only saw 5 targets, had a bad week, right? But I think 3 of his 5 targets were end zone targets, right? So he's still a prime weapon in that offense. And that's one of the things. Like, football is a game of inches, and Donnie ended up winning our spread pick this week because of an onside kick by the Jets, So even in that, and taking away from fantasy, it's like his thought process still worked out. Now, he didn't expect an onside kick. If we were fortune tellers, we'd all be rich. So just like have fun with it, know the process, trust the process, revise the prize. That's what we're all about. Like and subscribe. We'll be back with you on Friday night with more breakdowns of why we pick things in week 2, and we'll do a deeper dive into week 3 as we pick the lines as well for that week. So enjoy yourselves, guys. Stay safe. Join us Friday. Again, like and subscribe. Thanks to the boys for showing up today. I appreciate it.
Love it. Comment down below. see you on Friday, everyone.
Oh yes, please. We've been getting some really good comments from some really awesome people, so I appreciate it very much. Thanks for all the feedback.